Good evening and welcome to Unchained Night 7. My name is Joe Nesbitt.
And I'm Tricia Nesbitt.
And we're delighted that you're joining us again for more hope on this journey of healing with Pastor Richie Halverson. Tonight, Pastor Richie's going to talk to us about what it means to have forgiveness and to know forgiveness. As you're joining us tonight, we know that you are signing in, you are joining the chat from all over this planet. Would you take just a second? Chat in where you're coming in from tonight, whether it's local, closer to us, near Palmetto, Florida, or whether you are in Timbuktu, wherever Timbuktu happens to be. We would love to know where you are, where you're finding hope from this set tonight. Let me see here, one more housekeeping item. If you're not registered, would you please text the word register to the following number? You're going to see it on your screen too, but the number is 903-666-4541. Text the word register to 903-666-4541, and that puts you into the drawing for Pastor Richie's book, Darkness Shall Not Overcome. We would love for you to win that and to read for yourself his powerful journey about how he found hope and healing on the other side of an addiction to opioids. So thank you for registering if you haven't already. We are delighted to have with us tonight Juliet Van Heerden. Welcome.
Thank you. It's
I
good
am
to be here.
so sorry I cut you off there.
It's okay. I was just saying, well, it's good to be here. Thank you.
We're glad you're here. I'm going to start off tonight. I'm going to read something from your webpage.
Okay.
So, friends, if you want to go look at her webpage, you can follow along with me. It's julietvanheerden.com. And I'm reading something from the About Me portion. Listen to this. Juliet, you write, "I'm glad you're here. It's my heart's desire that God will use my stories to bring hope and healing to others." Now, that's just the first sentence. There's more. But you're here tonight to share hope with the audience, right?
Yes.
Could you take us on a journey? I understand that you wrote a book, 2013, if I'm remembering, called Same Dress, Different Day.
Yes.
And as Pastor Richie's going to talk to us in a few minutes about forgiveness, could you talk to us about the journey that inspired that book. Could you set the stage for some of the questions we're going to have about forgiveness?
I'd be happy to. I was never planning to write a book, and the things that were going on in my life from the time I was 24 for the next 13 years, I didn't think I would ever speak to anyone about, let alone write a whole book about my story. But Pastor Richie's stories have really touched me through this week, and I was married to someone with chemical dependency whose addiction drug of choice was cocaine. And so I know how it feels to be the wife watching drugs destroy your husband. And it was very difficult, almost 13 years that we were married. And so I wrote my book to give hope to families and especially to women who have an addicted loved one and who may be getting caught in the cycle like I was of enabling that person, controlling them. It's a real, it almost becomes an addiction in itself to try to control someone else who is chemically dependent.
Almost like you're addicted to the recovery process of trying to
Yes.
get them that direction.
Yes, yes. Yes, and so I share my story of what I went through as the wife, and we were in church, and it was very embarrassing and shameful, and we didn't speak about what was going on really in our lives. We would show up at church, hello, how are you, and have a great week, and we just didn't tell anyone what the truth was. And so it's just a story of one family's journey with addiction and how God brought me through the process of forgiving myself for making choices that weren't good in choosing someone who had these issues, and I didn't ask enough questions in the dating process when I was a young woman, and so I blamed myself for a lot of that, that pain that I suffered, and then also choosing to forgive him for what he did that destroyed his life and our marriage.
So you've already hinted at, and I'm guessing, please correct me, when the two of you were getting to know each other in the dating process, I'm taking it this was an unknown for you.
Yes.
You didn't realize, was it there already, but he just wasn't sharing it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, but it got worse. It was 6 years into our marriage before I realized the problem was drugs. I didn't know. I knew something was wrong. I knew there was a problem, but I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what was costing so much money. I didn't know why he was spending so much time away from home. I didn't know why he was lying and hiding things. I didn't know what I didn't know. And when I found out, I was devastated, and I realized in hindsight this had been going on off and on all along. But when the cocaine went to crack, then there was no hiding it, no going back. It set out to destroy not only our marriage but him as a person.
Everything it touched.
Yes.
So 6 years into the marriage, you find out this is going on.
Yes.
This begins a journey of trying to figure out how to deal with it.
Yes.
How long are you on that part of the journey with just you and him? When or where do you bring in other people? How did that happen?
We brought in other people when he was going to die or go to rehab. That was the choice that he had to make. And so we went to someone in our church who was a therapist, and he arranged for, I call him John in my book, for John to go to rehab. And so he went to rehab for the first time, and we really had a lot of hope that when he came home, everything would be fine. And I thought it was, but it wasn't.
So there was an initial ownership.
Yes.
Yes, let's go get help. Let's get on the right track. I don't want to do this anymore.
Right.
So you finished the rehab, but you're saying something happens.
Yes. Often after rehab comes relapse. And people aren't really prepared to deal with that. But when you have an addicted loved one, you need to be prepared. I wasn't. I thought rehab was going to fix everything. So we had relapse and 7 more years of marriage with relapse and relapse and relapse. And so you on this crazy cycle of hope and things are going to be okay. And we relocated in hopes of, getting
Start
away
over
from,
fresh.
all the triggers and started fresh. But then there was another relapse. And so someone told me my book was too long, that that it was like it just
Wow.
went on and on and on. I said, yes, that was on purpose, because that's how it feels
a
to be in
journey,
this.
right,
It
yeah.
goes on and on and on, and
Wow.
it's exhausting.
Yeah.
But there is hope. There is hope.
Yeah.
And I can say at this moment, we are not married and have not been since 2007. He did go to prison. He got clean and sober. And at this point in time, as far as I know from some family members, he's living clean and sober. And so if you love somebody, whether it's a child or a spouse, there is hope. There is hope. And I want that message to be very clear.
Sure.
Yeah.
I
Can
understand.
I ask a question real
Please,
quick?
go
So,
ahead.
Julia, we've known each other for a while, and I'm
Yes.
so glad you're here. Like,
Thank
we're
you.
close friends, and we get to talk a little bit through texting, but this is the first time we've seen each other in a while, so I'm
Yes.
really glad to see you, and it's kind of
Thank
fun
you.
to do it here. It's great. So, when in that time where it was like, going to rehab and then relapsing, and with your spouse relapsing, how did you carry on the hope that was during, it's like such an emotional roller coaster. How did you hang on to that? Or did you at times feel like you were just, losing hope? Or what was that like for you?
Sometimes I felt like I was losing hope, and I was very private, and I felt isolated and alone. A lot of times I didn't speak to my family what was really going on. And where I found hope was in my time with God, journaling and pouring out my heart to God through prayer and writing my pain to Him. But I also found that I needed connection. I needed to share with a real human what was going on. And so I did seek counseling for myself. And then I discovered the Christ Center 12-step program
Okay.
and started connecting with that community, people who got it.
So Celebrate Recovery.
So that was the first one that I went to was
Okay.
Celebrate Recovery.
Wow.
And I really felt like, wow, okay, here I can be transparent, be authentic, share how I really feel, and receive tools to work through what we were going through.
Can I just highlight that for our
Mhm.
viewers
That's
really quickly?
powerful.
So, all week long, you're hearing different accounts, and you have two pastors up here. Pastor Jay has been here. Pastor Richie's talking to you every night. And time after time, the accounts are saying this: God will see you through it, but He also gives you help.
Yes.
Yes.
It's almost like if we break a bone, He's designed the healing process, but we still need the cast. And you still need the crutches, and you might need the wheelchair. And what we want to highlight this week is, yes, pray. Yes, believe that God can get you through it, because Pastor Richie's highlighting every night he can.
Yes.
But we also want to highlight those ministries and those programs, whether it is the 12-step program, whether it's Celebrate Recovery. We can't say enough about the value of those. It's not either or. It's not either God or human help. It's
Yeah.
both and.
That's a really good point. That's really,
Thank you.
mhm.
We,
Yeah.
we really want to hit that, because I just wanted to tap that gently, because, friends, we want you to find help, and oftentimes it's through the witness and the experience of other people. And those 12-step programs are amazing.
Amen.
People share from the heart. They
Yeah.
tell other people what's really happening in the sharing, and it gives you hope. You listen to other people's stories, and it's like, okay, someone understands what we're going through. Someone gets it. And just being able to be in a community like that really validates what's happening in your life. And there's a lot of shame associated with addiction, and we just kind of want to be like hiding. We can't speak. We can't even if it's if I'm not the one who's snorting cocaine, there was still a lot of shame surrounding it. And so just being able to to be in a community, a recovery community that is able to take off that shame mask and speak openly and share with one another what's going on.
Absolutely.
Helps so
That
much.
authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so important for healing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being honest. Yeah.
Yes.
With
Powerful.
Celebrate Recovery or with the other things that you found, are there some that stand out to you even to this day? Like, for my part of the journey as the spouse of someone who had this dependency, these really helped me through.
Well, it was definitely connecting with a Christ-centered recovery group, finding a therapist or a counselor that I could go deeper with. It didn't take forever, but for a season, I really needed that. I needed even recovering from the grief of
Right.
the losses
Wow.
that we experienced through that time. You have to be able to process these things, and sometimes we don't even realize how much we're hurting until we begin to share it with another
Right.
person and we experience their compassion and their love. And some people say, well, I can't afford a counselor, I can't afford a therapist, or I can't find someone I trust. Even a trusted friend. If you have a person in your life that you can be honest and authentic with and just let them listen to you with compassion and love, there is so much healing in that.
Yeah, and that highlights connection too, like you
Yes.
were saying. Yeah, that's important.
It
That's
also
huge.
it also takes, sometimes when we don't have all those initials after our name, we almost feel helpless.
Yes.
Like, hey, I'm not of value to this person that's going through this. And so the temptation would be to stand off. Hey, I hope they find a counselor. I hope they find.
Wow.
Yes.
And we could
Yep.
stay in that I hope they part and never draw near.
Wow.
Yes.
But if I'm hearing you right, you're saying,
Yep.
don't worry about the initials behind your name. What matters is the two arms and the compassion and the listening ears.
Yes. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's empowering, that thought. Just
Yeah.
sometimes we don't think we don't know how to help, maybe because we can't relate to the entire journey that you're having, but we all need connection and we've all been in really difficult and sometimes really dark places. So, yeah, just being able to know and have, the empowerment and encouragement to it's okay to reach out and it's okay to embrace people in their journey and you don't have to know everything. You don't have to be an expert, 'cause
But
we
it
all bring-
takes,
yeah.
sorry,
No, go ahead.
it just takes being willing to be transparent and authentic and not to hide behind the mask of everything's fine, my life's fine, just to be real. And sometimes, we have to get over ourselves and our pride in order to be able to reach out and say, look, I need someone to listen to me, or can you help me? Or, just
Yeah.
be willing to actually talk about what's happening.
100%.
Mm-hmm.
You have a really powerful chapter in your book. We talked a little bit about it,
Yes.
kind of hovering around the concept of forgiveness. Can you share a couple of things about some of the thoughts you've had in there that were really deep and
Okay.
powerful?
Yes, it's the chapter where the marriage is ending, and we had gone to couples therapy for a while, and the therapist, this was the final time we were going to go. The therapist had us walk through kind of a closure ceremony for our marriage. I'd never heard of anything like that before, but
Honoring it.
sorry,
Honoring.
honoring those almost 13 years that we're married. And so he had us share like favorite memory, a request, a regret, and the decision that I made, and here's where we connect to what Pastor Richie is going to talk about tonight about forgiveness. The decision that I made that evening in that room was the choice to forgive John for everything he had done to break the trust that I had in him as a husband. And he did a lot of things that were very hurtful to me. And so I made a decision. I choose to forgive you, and to verbalize that to him. Even though I didn't feel 100% like, okay,
Right,
everything's fine,
sure.
because it's not fine. Forgiveness isn't a feeling that everything's fine. It's a choice and a decision that we make.
A starting point.
A starting point. And it was the starting point of my freedom, really, to be
Wow.
able to walk away from that counseling session, to say goodbye. I forgive you. I'm releasing you. And to be able to move forward with, the freedom
Wow.
of without having that being in bondage to him. Because
Yeah.
I could have walked away that night and still held on to bitterness, unforgiveness, and resentment. Even though he wasn't in my life, those things would still have held me in bondage to him.
So goodbye brokenness, hello healing.
Yes.
Even though it's just the first few steps.
Yes. Yes.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I come from a long line of good grudge holders. We're good Southern women who know how to hold a grudge and be bitter. And so it's a generational stronghold in our family, really. And so the enemy of our souls will always try to hit us at the point where we're the weakest.
Wow.
And I'm tempted to hold a grudge, to be unforgiving. And so, lots of times after that day, there were opportunities for me to get those feelings and be tempted to be bitter. And so I've had to continue to make the decision to forgive not only him, but
Sure.
we live on planet Earth. There's always something hurtful. There are always unmet expectations, and we have to make a decision to forgive.
Yeah, that's powerful. That it's not necessarily a feeling, but it's a choice, and the freedom that can come from making that choice. That's beautiful. Wow.
So as you make the decision to forgive that night and you step forward, between then and today, a lot has happened.
Yes.
Right.
We know the current amazing guy that you're
Yes.
married to. I know
Yes.
he's
Hey,
watching out
Andre.
there somewhere. How
Yeah.
do you remain unchained?
Wow,
How do
good
you
question.
stay
Oof.
forgiving?
Yes, that's a great question. Yeah.
We walk in forgiveness. It's a
Wow,
choice
powerful.
that I make every day
Wow.
to walk in forgiveness. And God has redeemed my life. He's redeemed my dreams. He's given me we just celebrated our 12th anniversary.
Amen.
And
Yay.
yes, my husband's a pastor, but he's a human being and he's not perfect. And I do have to forgive him sometimes. So
Love you,
That
Andre.
doesn't happen with us. Never.
no, I mean we get hurt, we get wounded. We have to make a decision often to choose to forgive. I choose to forgive you, and
Beautiful.
to let go of what I'm tempted to hold on to.
Wow. Love it.
As we're thinking of the listening audience and we're thinking about the people who there's the hurts, the hang-ups, the heartaches, and the habits and the valleys they're walking through. As we are wrapping this part of it, and Juliet's going to be here for question and answer. After Pastor Richie speaks, come back because we're going to ask some more questions. What kind of advice could you give somebody who might be in that place where you were at year 6? Not 7 years beyond that.
Wow.
At that point where you realize, uh-oh, what could you encourage someone with to say, there's hope beyond this?
Okay.
Great question.
So what I would say to you is that you can get through whatever it is, no matter who you're loving that's hurting themselves with whatever addiction they're caught in. You can separate yourself from their cycle and choose healing for your own self and choose to love them, but to have boundaries and to seek godly counsel from people who really understand the addiction that your loved one is dealing with, and it affects the entire family. So I would say seek help for yourself. Give yourself the opportunity to set boundaries and not feel guilty for it, because it's too easy to get caught up in what everyone else is doing and forget that we matter.
Wow.
I didn't know that I mattered for a long time, but my mental health matters and yours matters, and it's important to recognize that.
That's a powerful,
Yeah.
powerful thought.
Amazing.
Because there is going to be pressure from certain family members or certain corners of the groups that you belong to hey, keep this quiet.
Right.
You know, you're not just messing with you guys, you're messing with us because we're connected to you. But I hear you saying love does confront.
Yes.
Love also cares enough, not only for them, but for the person going through it. We're gonna.
Yes.
I know I'm gonna come back to that for the Q&A.
Okay.
But Juliet, thank you so much for being here. It is such a powerful thing to hear. Start with choosing forgiveness.
Yes.
And then, if I remember right, you said each day walk in forgiveness. That's an incredible thought. Is there anything else that you want to say before we transition to Pastor Richie?
I can't think of anything at the moment. I'll think of it afterwards, though.
That
There's
sounds good.
hope. That's what I really want to say. There is hope beyond whatever you're going through. There is hope. There is healing. And God can get you through it.
Thank you so much. Friends, that being said, we want to continue this thought of hope. And Pastor Richie has a powerful message for you tonight. We're going to switch over to Pastor Richie now as he talks about forgiveness. Thank you for coming tonight. We're glad you're here.
Welcome to Unchained, Hope and Healing from Addiction. My name is Richie Halverson. For years, I struggled with addiction to opioids, but when I became willing to do something different and I surrendered to a new way of life, man, I started seeing those chains begin to fall off. And the thing about addiction is over time, the burden and the guilt and the shame begin to pile up. You hurt a lot of people when you're in active addiction. And a lot of people are hurt by addicts, and often addicts are hurt people. And the people that they're often hardest on is themselves. One of the important breakthroughs that we have to experience is forgiveness. We have to forgive ourselves, we have to forgive others, and we have to allow ourselves to be forgiven. In 2 Corinthians 5:18 through 20, it says, God who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. You see, to live an unchained life in a messed up world where people do some crazy stuff, we're going to have to learn how to forgive. Real forgiveness is something called reconciliation. It's not just saying I'm sorry. Reconciliation is basically restoring a relationship to its original condition before the pain and the betrayal happened. Saying you forgive someone but making their life miserable, that's not forgiveness. Saying you forgive someone but constantly reminding them of their mistake, that's not forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't easy, but it's absolutely necessary if you're going to live an unchained life. If you're going to be freed from the past that's holding you back. Of all the 12 steps that I hear people talk about, even if they've never been through recovery, is steps 8 and 9. I believe that's because those are the ones that are dealing with reconciliation. Those are the ones that are dealing with forgiveness. They are probably the most intimidating. So step 8 is making a list of all persons we had harmed, and we became willing to make amends to them all. And then step 9 is make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. I always thought making amends was saying sorry until I worked this step and discovered this word, reconciliation. Real amends is working to restore the relationship. Real amends means stopping the behavior that keeps causing me to have to say, I'm sorry. In fact, sorry without change makes it worse. If I keep saying I'm sorry for a behavior, but I don't discontinue that behavior, that makes it worse. My wife got so sick of hearing me say, I'm sorry I stole from her. I'm sorry I got high. I'm sorry I was late to pick up the kids. I'm sorry I didn't even come close to picking up the kids. I'm sorry. Until one day she got so sick of it, she looked at me and she said, yeah, you got that part right. You are sorry, Richie. You see, real amends requires change. Change is hard. But friends, nothing is more freeing than real forgiveness, reconciliation. Man, when I think of forgiveness, there's this person in the Bible that immediately comes to my mind. His name was Joseph. Okay, so his brothers, they beat him up, they throw him in a pit, they sell him into slavery falsely. And then after he goes to slavery, he gets purchased, and the guy he's working for, his wife comes on to Joseph. He gets falsely accused. Then he gets thrown into prison unjustly. Man, the guy can't catch a break. While in prison, he interprets the dream of the royal cupbearer. He tells him, hey, in 3 days, you're getting out of here. But could you just do me one favor? In Genesis 40:14, he says, mention me to Pharaoh so he might let me out of this place. But notice, verse 23 says, the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Joseph remains in prison for 2 more years. Now, I want to be honest. The cupbearer was lucky that Joseph wasn't me. Because if and when I got promoted to vice pharaoh, first order of business, bring in the royal cupbearer. But this is the thing, revenge sounds good at first, but revenge will ruin you in the end. It may have an immediate feeling, a rush of endorphins and feel good, but friends, the price and the chain is far too heavy of a burden to bear. When you look at Joseph's life, most of his pain came from one place, his family. You do know the hardest people to forgive are people in your family. And that's because you can't ignore the people you live with. It's easy to forgive someone you don't see much. In fact, I would suggest we don't really forgive them, we just forget them, right? It's easy to forgive people that we don't see very much, but the person that you got to work with and live with and raise kids with and man, you got to sleep next to, that is hard. Joseph didn't deserve everything that happened to him. Everything that happened to him wasn't right. Nothing was justified that the brothers did. But when you're following this story, it does seem like Joseph might have been a little bit hard to live with. Okay, he seemed to have been a little bit of a tattletale. He seemed to be a little spoiled. You know, his father loved him. You know, he got a special coat. None of the other brothers got a special coat. He seemed a bit of a show-off. I think he was probably a little annoying. Hey guys, I had another dream last night. Who cares, Joseph? But according to Genesis 37, Joseph's brothers hated him. No matter how annoying Joseph was, he didn't deserve the hate. It says that they couldn't say anything nice about him. They were jealous of him. Let me tell you, jealousy, hate, and anger, those chains will kill you and burden you and crush you as fast as any drug. These brothers are going to discover that the short-term satisfaction of getting even isn't worth the long-term price that you have to pay. While Joseph was in prison, think about that, 13 years in prison for what his brothers did. With every bowl of prison food that he had to eat, every beating from a prison guard he had to get, every second, minute, hour, day, year lost, Joseph was reminded of what his brothers did to him. But as you study this, something jumped out at me as I was reading this story. You keep running into this same phrase. In Genesis 39:2, it says that the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in Potiphar's home, the Lord was with Joseph. When Joseph was in prison, the Lord was with Joseph. In Pharaoh's court, the Lord was with Joseph. No matter where you are right now, God is with you. And so instead of wasting time planning his revenge, Joseph spends his time getting to know God and heal. Instead of staying in the problem of what happened to him, Joseph gets into the solution. You see, revenge only hurts. Resentments only hold us back. They do not help the pain that you've experienced in life. Instead of letting the pain make him bitter, Joseph let pain make him better. Man, I experienced a lot of pain in active addiction. I lost a lot of stuff, and I almost lost my family, and I almost lost my life. I went through a lot of pain. And so I'm going to allow that pain, instead of being kept prison in that pain, I want to experience freedom from that pain. I'm going to use that pain in order to push me forward. You see, Joseph let the pain make him better. We're not responsible for everything that happens to us. Some of us may have had some very terrible things that were done to us. And you know what? We're not responsible for everything that happened to us. But we are responsible for the way that we respond to what happens to us. The first time I ever worked step 8 and 9, in recovery, man, I had a massive list. I had to make a list of all the people that I had harmed in my active addiction. People I stole from, people I lied to, people I endangered, people I hurt. The people you love the most, you usually hurt the most. But like Joseph, I knew that I wasn't alone. You see, just as God was with Joseph, God was with me. God put people in my life that were healthy, that were going places where I wanted to go. I had a sponsor who had gone through what I had gone through, who had made amends, who had reconciled his relationships, who was there to help me. They say the steps are in order for a reason. There are people who want to jump over step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go all the way to 8 and 9 and start making amends. Don't do that. They're in order for a reason. Each principle builds on the next and prepares you for the next one. And so it was helpful to have a sponsor who reminded me of this process of reconciliation. He reminded me not to put expectations on these amends. He said, Richie, look, don't go into this amends expecting them to take it a certain way. Don't expect them to receive your amends and receive you back in open arms. He reminded me that I wasn't responsible for their reaction, but my action. I'm not responsible for anybody else, just my action. And so I started making these amends. And you know what? I went up to some people and they were angry. I went up to some people, man, they said, I don't ever want to see you again. I went up to other people and they were upset. They were sad. They were hurt. How could you do this to me? But you know what? I went to other people and they were happy. But you know what? Regardless of how it was received, my burden was lifting. Which, with each amends I made, with every reconciliation, my chains started breaking. In the Lord's Prayer that Jesus teaches the disciples, it's interesting because it says, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Notice it doesn't say before or after. It says as. As we forgive, so we are forgiven. Only when we forgive do we start feeling forgiven. In Matthew 6:14 through 15, it says, if you forgive others, your heavenly Father will forgive you. But if you do not forgive others, neither will your Father forgive you. Now, I don't believe this is saying that God's up in heaven keeping track and he's saying, okay, they finally forgave a sin. Now I'll forgive one of his sins. Okay, 2 sins, now 2 sins. No, I don't believe that's what it's saying. What it's saying is only when we receive God's forgiveness can we adequately ever give forgiveness. Matthew 18:35 says we have to forgive from the heart. Matthew 12:34 says out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. The reason some of us can't ever forgive is we've never allowed ourselves to be forgiven. We have no forgiveness to give. You know, our hearts are, there's no room for forgiveness in our hearts. And the problem is you can't give out of a deficit. And so before you can ever give forgiveness, we've got to receive forgiveness. And as I was making those amends, man, I started feeling free, regardless of the way it was received, regardless of whether someone accepted or not. It was about me doing the right thing. It was about me breaking the chain of shame, breaking the chain of guilt, breaking those chains. But the person that I had at the very top of my amends list was myself. I had to learn to forgive myself. It's a process. It doesn't happen overnight. But let me tell you, freedom comes with forgiveness. When we get to the end of this story, Joseph's brothers show up. It's kind of interesting. The tables have turned. It's a drought going on, and Joseph's brothers show up. They need his help now. They don't recognize him, but boy, Joseph recognizes them. They're the brothers that beat him up and threw him away. And throughout this encounter, Joseph has to keep excusing himself in order to hide his weakness. Because you guys, real forgiveness is hard. It's not easy. Real forgiveness it's a mini death. It's not easy. And so Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can really trust them. You see, forgiveness is not being a punching bag. Forgiveness doesn't mean you just excuse bad behavior. Forgiveness is not enabling someone to continue. That's not forgiveness. No, Joseph tests his brothers to see if he can trust them. People will be clean for 5 days and they'll come up to me and say, yeah, my wife still doesn't trust me. My mom still doesn't trust me. My dad doesn't trust me. You've been clean for 5 days. And look, that's great, but it's going to take more than 5 days. You know? That's great. You haven't lost your temper in 10 days, but you've been losing your temper for 20 years. It's going to take some time for them to trust you. You used for years. Maybe you lied for years. Maybe you had an affair for years. Maybe you've been a jerk for years, right? A trust violated for years doesn't heal overnight. Trust is going to take time to reestablish. It took time for my wife to trust me again. It took time for my wife to be open to opening her heart to receive me again. You see, for reconciliation to happen between Joseph and his brothers, trust has to be reestablished. And trust can only be reestablished through time. Not I'm sorry, but time. Joseph pretends like he's going to put the youngest brother, Benjamin, in prison. He is the last son of Jacob's late wife. But in almost the exact opposite way, instead of doing to Benjamin what they did to Joseph, these brothers beg to take Benjamin's place. Instead of allowing him to go into prison as they had done with Joseph, they asked to go in his place. You see, friends, this is the key. Joseph is not the only one who's been in a prison. In fact, his brothers have been in a prison, a mental prison, a physical prison, much longer than Joseph has. I've discovered that my mental prisons were far worse than any jails or institutions or prisons that I ever went to in my active addiction. These brothers need to be set free. They need the freedom of forgiveness and reconciliation. In Genesis 45, 1 through 2, notice what it says. Then Joseph could not control himself. Before all those who stood by him, he cried. He wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard him, and the household of the Pharaoh heard him. You see, friends, forgiveness hurts, but it's where the healing can begin. It's where the tears can happen, and it's where you finally feel this weight lifted. Genesis 50:20. Notice what Joseph says. He says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people. In Romans 8:28, it says, for those who love God, all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. This is probably one of the most misquoted scriptures. This doesn't mean that everything that happens is from God, because not everything that happens in life comes from God. This doesn't mean that everything that happens in life is good. What it's saying is that everything that happens, even bad things, God can bring something good out of it. Just look at the life of Joseph. In fact, nowhere do we see this reality more than in the cross of Jesus Christ. In Romans 5:7, it says, one will scarcely die for a righteous person. It's hard enough to forgive and take a bullet for someone we love, let alone someone we hate. And yet we read in Romans, God showed his love for us in that while we were sinners, now in the Greek, it's enemies. While we were enemies, Christ died for us. I like the way the Message paraphrase puts it. God put his love on the line for us by offering his son in sacrificial death while we were of no use whatever to him. You see, often we forgive people because we still have use for them. We live with them, we work with them. You know what? I'll enjoy life better if I just kind of forgive them or say I forgive them. But if we only forgive someone to get something out of it, it's not real forgiveness. It's a transaction. According to Romans 5:8, God forgave us when we were only a liability, when we brought nothing to the table. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. But friends, when you are really hurt, when you really have reason to be upset, when you have a reason to resent, but instead of taking it out on them, you absorb the pain and you forgive them and restore the relationship to where it was before you hurt. That's where real healing can begin. That's where real freedom is. On the cross, Jesus forgives his executioners. He says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And like Joseph, Jesus was abandoned and betrayed by 12 brothers, his disciples. Judas and Peter usually take all the blame, but Mark 14:50 says they all forsook him and fled. But the good news, and it's the core of living an unchained life, is that Jesus, instead of retaliating or repaying, Jesus started reconciling. Like Joseph, Jesus ends up at the right hand of power. And instead of using his power to condemn his betrayers, he uses his power to save his betrayers. Instead of giving me what I deserved, Christ took my shame to the cross and he killed it to set me free. C.S. Lewis said, "To be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable because God has forgiven the inexcusable in you." When the world did its worst, God gave his very best. Let his perfect forgiveness free you right now. All of us need to feel the chain of forgiveness break. Let it break you, break that chain of guilt and shame and hurt and pain right now. Give it to God. Let him set you free.
Welcome back. Pastor Richie, once again, boy, he really calls things, doesn't he? I mean, even as I'm sitting here listening to this, real forgiveness is not transactional. That is amazing thought. We are delighted. Again, if you're just tuning in, we have Juliet Van Heerden with us tonight. And again, Juliet, thank you so much for being on this set and for sharing hope. There's a couple questions that have come in from the internet, and we're just going to start back with those, if that's okay.
Sure.
All right.
Yeah, so this is a great question. It's 2 parts. It says, if forgiveness is reconciliation, how can you forgive someone who is not changing? That's part 1. And then the follow-up question would be, is reconciliation necessary in forgiveness?
Wow, good questions.
Very good questions.
I can repeat them if you want.
I don't think forgiveness equals reconciliation. Our desire, especially when we have addicted loved ones, is a relationship. Where we want the relationship, we want to reconcile with them, but it takes more than one person in order to be able to reconcile and to be able to have a relationship. Forgiveness can do 2 things. It can restore a relationship and it can help us to reconcile, but it can also release. And sometimes, as in this situation with my first husband, the choice of forgiveness that I made with him was to release him from the bondage of my expectations and to set myself free from being bound to him through the spirit of unforgiveness.
Wow.
Wow.
To sever a connection, freeing both parties.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
incredible. There's a thought hiding in there that goes back to something you said before Pastor Richie talked to us. There's a moment in this journey where there's a paradigm shift where you almost wake up and say, wait, I matter too. I'm valuable too.
Yes.
Can you talk to us when that occurred? Do you remember how it occurred? Like, at what point did you realize, no, in this process, I matter?
Okay. I kind of had an aha moment when my therapist said, "You are making his addiction your life."
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I didn't know about the word codependency at that time,
Right.
but that's when I learned codependency. And
I've lost myself.
yes,
Yes.
and I realized, yes, that's really true. Like every waking thought is he using? Is he not using? Is he
Wow.
lying? Is he not lying?
Yep.
Are we going to be able to pay the bills because he snorted all the money? Or, how am I going to do this? So my whole life was his cycle of addiction.
Wow.
And I just had to be like, okay, yes, that's me. And every time he doesn't come home on a Friday after getting paid, am I sitting there eating half a gallon of mint chocolate chip ice cream?
Right.
So I was numbing my pain with my own addiction of
Wow.
sugar and,
Right.
whatever. It
Yeah,
can be
whatever.
whatever.
Right.
So I realized, wow, I'm caught in that cycle too. And
Wow.
it's a problem.
How did you, going forward from that aha moment, how do you stay in the place of I matter and I need to not be codependent? I need to also be thinking about my health and me. How do you
Yes.
stay in that?
It's hard because
Yeah.
those are patterns, and I have to be aware of it. I have to actually just make myself aware of, am I crossing that boundary where where I'm putting myself in someone else's life too much, and am I allowing what they're doing, their choices, to affect me too much? And I really had to learn a lot about boundaries. And it's been very helpful. I've grown a lot as a human being, and I still have a lot of growing to do. When my husband and I, my current husband and I, Andre, when we adopted 2 teenagers 6 years ago, I got triggered a lot from some
Okay.
choices that my kids were making, and I found myself face to face with the old me in the mirror, and I had to be very careful about not relapsing into my own
Right. More mint chocolate chip ice cream, and
yes,
etc.
whatever
Right.
it is.
So it's I dare say that staying in I matter and I need to be aware of me is also a day by day.
Right.
It's not, it's not selfish. Realizing
Right.
that
Right.
that's not selfish. That's healthy.
You're
That's
valuing.
that's
value.
healthy.
There is there a sense there too where you come to the place where you say, in order for me to be of value to others, even in their own recovery, I have to be healthy.
Yes.
I have to have my sleep. I
Yes.
have to have certain things taken care of,
Yes.
and they're non-negotiable.
We see these memes on social media, self-care matters and
Right.
but self-care is more than a manicure and a pedicure. Self-care is really taking care of, it's soul care.
Right. Wow. Beautiful.
That's powerful.
Yeah. Very cool.
Is that something that you can share with the audience a little bit more about this soul care, self-care? Because it sounds like from that aha moment, you begin a journey that's much different than the previous period. Is there something you can share with them that you can say, hey, take care of yourself in the following areas?
Okay. Yes, I can. Financially, if you're married to someone who is using all the funds for whatever their addiction is, you have to take care of yourself financially. And sometimes that's hard in a marriage.
Right.
But get some counsel. How can I set money aside? How can I make sure that I'm taken care of, even though this person isn't taking care of us?
So you begin separating so that you can not just survive, but begin to thrive.
Yes.
So detaching. Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
It's
In
difficult.
love.
Detaching in love
Yeah.
in certain areas. And that was a big one for me.
Financially, I need certain resources so that I can exist.
And if you have children, so that the kids can have what they need. And so learning how to take care of yourself in that kind of way. Physically, my health matters. And when I stay up all night worrying, or when I numb with sugar or some, things like that, I'm hurting me in the long run. And really taking care of my body is important. And we can find ourselves so caught up in these other people's worlds that we neglect ourselves until something happens, and it feels like it's too late when we end up in the hospital or with a diagnosis.
There's a moment of
Powerful.
choice in there where if this ship is going down and it's not getting healthier, do I go down with it, or do I choose that love that separates and says, I'm going to take care of myself, my children, etc. And that's not easy. Can't be.
Yeah, it sounds like
It's
more
not.
like a process too.
It's a process, and it really helps to have a witness to your life, someone that you trust, who can remind you of the decisions that you made and the boundaries that you set.
Right. Yeah.
It does. They can say kindly and in love, remember when we had that conversation and you decided to do this, because we have these moments of weakness and the other person can be very manipulative, and we
Right.
second guess ourselves in our truth. And so it really, like we talked about earlier, to have a connection with someone who's a witness to your life and can encourage you to move forward with those choices that you made when you were sane and sober yourself.
Yeah.
Healthy choices.
Yes.
And it really seems like you really have to have that connection so that you can have the accountability, because there's a level of trust that has to be there in that authentic relationship
Yes.
and that transparency.
Yes.
So there has to be like that congruence in the relationship. That's
Yes.
yes.
Did you find yourself, as you started to separate healthfully, did you find yourself then intentionally choosing friendships and safe people? Like, did you, instead of saying, I'm just going to do this differently on my own, were you also changing who you were hanging out with during that time period?
Well, I had a really good, solid friendship base. And so I had my people, but coming out of a relationship where my spouse's mistress was cocaine
Wow.
and I was
Wow.
neglected and not paid attention to,
Wow.
I was very vulnerable.
Right. Gotcha.
And I could say this to many women and men.
Yep.
You come out of that, someone pays attention to you, and you can go down the same rabbit trail again in a different kind of way.
Wow.
And that
Understood.
happened to me. It was the hardest.
Wow.
This was the hardest chapter in my book to write because I was very honest
Yeah,
about what
wow.
happened. But I got
Wow.
sucked into another relationship that wasn't good, and was ended up hurtful, and I had to learn another hard lesson. So we do have to set a boundary and be very careful with who we have in our lives and who we
Yeah.
choose to allow in when we're hurting and vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and I
that
think that would
awareness.
take us full
Yeah.
circle back to forgiveness, because when something like that happens, these hardest chapters, we end up then saying, hey, I thought I was making good decisions here, but now I've done something to hurt. And you end up having to come back and forgive yourself
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
while
That's a
you're
good
forgiving somebody else.
Point.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. We have one more question. Can
Go
I?
ahead.
Do we have time? Okay. So, Juliet, the question was, how can we tell the difference between healthy self-care and selfishness?
It's a very good question. And sometimes we feel selfish when we do good things for ourselves. But God designed us with emotions, that things that bring us, when we have joy, when we feel good, really good about something, it is healing to us. And so I'm tempted sometimes, if I do something good for myself, to feel selfish, but we need to recognize that no, I'm valuable.
Yep.
This is okay. This is good for me. And I'm not talking about being frivolous or wasteful or those kinds of things. I'm talking about really, really taking care of me. And that's okay. A lot of times single moms have a hard time with this
Right.
because they put their kids first. They
Yep.
put everyone first. But stepping back and saying, I really matter, and I can be the best mom, the best friend, the best spouse, whatever. When I take care of myself, I can be the best for other people too.
Wow. That's
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Because the codependent partner on the other side is going to say, anytime you spend away from me is selfish.
Yes.
They're going to be trying to define your health.
Yes.
And that's going to be difficult to
Yes.
say, no, actually, this is something that is healthy for me, and I'm sorry you don't recognize that.
And that goes back to the boundaries being important for the self-care and the soul care. Yeah. Interesting. So much there to talk about. It's awesome
And
to
fortunately,
hear
You have
insight.
brought the 2 books that you authored.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about them? Because audience, when you're looking for resources, when you're looking for that light at the other end of that tunnel, when you're looking for that hope beyond the hurts, the habits, the heartaches, these are 2 amazing resources. And could you share with us and
Yes.
with the audience just a
Yes.
little bit?
I would be happy to. I'm excited to share. So this is the book we've been referring to. I always call it my book because it was the first. It was the first. It's my baby, but it's called Same Dress, Different Day. And it's a spiritual memoir of addiction and redemption. And it walks through the journey with me of being married to a chemically dependent spouse. But it really talks about my codependency and my addiction to control and enabling. And so it's a book of hope. And I wanted to share with you all I spoke about that moment in the counselor's office, and I wanted to share with you my favorite quote from my book. It says, "Forgiveness is the sharpest tool for cutting soul ties with someone from our past. It is bitterness that binds."
Wow.
And that, to me, is the crux of what we've been talking about
Absolutely.
tonight. The second book also, it's called As I Walked, One Man's Quest for Sexual and Spiritual Identity. And this is the story of my stepfather. And there is a powerful piece in here about forgiveness as well. But if we have time, I'd just like to read the blurb on the back.
Please do.
He says, "My boyish innocence was stolen by a sexual predator, and I kept the soul-gnawing secret for decades. That experience changed me. Growing up in 1950s England, I couldn't discuss my sexual identity issues with anyone. Feeling isolated and confused, I turned my back on the father who misunderstood me and the religion that failed me. Later, as I lost friends to AIDS and suicide, I became more determined than ever to live by faith and not by feeling." This man has been married to my mother for 31 years and has been an amazing husband and stepfather to my sister and myself. But he had to walk out his journey of faith with God. He wanted a wife, but his sexual identity was messed up because he was molested by a man as a young boy. And he was really struggling in his mind with who he was. And part of his story had to do with forgiving his father as well. And I just will read this one little paragraph. He said, "Bitterness toward my father was affecting my spiritual growth. As God broke me free from one spiritual stronghold, I couldn't hold on to another. A Christian counselor said to me, 'You have got to forgive and love your father before he drops dead. You have got to do it. Even if you don't feel it, you have to do it. Love is an act, a decision, not an emotion.'"
Wow.
And this was a case of where he chose to forgive, and it brought reconciliation.
Wow.
And they were able to have a relationship. In this book, the forgiveness brought the freedom of separation. So it's two different stories and two different angles, but a beautiful story about how God set a man free from struggles with his sexual identity and gave him the identity that God designed him to have.
It sounds like forgiveness is this powerful thing that may have different outcomes.
Yes.
One instrument of cutting from the past with different types of freedom almost.
And
I'm
a
gonna
gift. You
and
could
a
say
gift.
and a gift, yeah.
I'm going to shamelessly
I-
plug Juliet Van Heerden's website. It's
Thank you.
julietvanheerden.com. And if her name is up on the screen there, Juliet, I'm going to say because she mentions this on her site, Juliet as in Romeo and Juliet, Van, V-A-N, Heerden, Heerden.com. So julietvanheerden.com.
And Julia, we didn't get to touch on it on this time, but I love how you write. You're just a beautiful writer.
Thank
and
you.
I know that journaling was a part of your, how you were even from a young age journaling and going through all these experiences. Do you want to say just a little tiny bit about that? Yeah.
Well, yes, and I touched on it earlier just a little bit that when I was isolating, even as a child, I'm an introvert. So
Right,
I
yeah.
turned to writing to get my thoughts and my
Wow.
feelings out. And when I was feeling very alone going through some of these trials, journaling was part of my healing, a huge part of my healing. And that's how I was able to write this book, because I could not have remembered all of the details of
Wow.
things that happened. But I went back through my years of journaling, and I could see how God was growing me, how he had answered prayers, what he was doing in my life. And so I encourage anybody who doesn't journal to find the time, make the time to write your thoughts, your feelings, your process, your prayers, and let God do some healing through that process.
Beautiful.
And I might say that maybe, like Juliet,
Mhm.
something you're writing privately about your experience might become a powerful tool for hope
Amen.
in someone else's life.
Amen.
Juliet, thank you
Beautiful.
so much for being with us
It's a
tonight.
pleasure.
Thank you for hope and for sharing
Yes.
that hope with the audience. Friends, before we go tonight, we just want to mention the book winner, Pastor Richie Halverson's book. I have the name right here,
Oh, great.
as if by
was like-
magic. Friends, and let's steal from Jay here. There's a
Oh, yeah.
drum roll, right? So a little drum
Gotta
roll,
keep
please.
tradition
All right.
here.
Tonight's winner is Aaron Young. Aaron, we're going to pass your name along, and we'll be in touch with you. Someone from our team will be in touch with you. Thank you so much for registering. Friends, we want to warmly invite you to come back tomorrow night, 7:30, same time, same location, for more powerful messages of hope beyond the hurts, the hang-ups, the heartaches, and the habits. God bless you. Hope you have a wonderful night. Take care.
Amen.